Hello and welcome to the City and Guilds Functional Skills Level 2 Maths Test example. So for this I'm going to run through the City and Guilds Functional Skills Level 2 exemplar test that they've got, sample number 1 for Maths. It's relatively straightforward. I will go through the test from beginning to end and I'll try to explain what I'm doing as I'm going through it. You can see those were the sample 1 tests. This is the website that we go to load the test up. It's City and Guild's own website. We just click through the confirm options. Like I said, this is a sample test so anyone can do it. And here we have the exam functional skills test. You can see it says there are 3 tasks to complete. Each task is worth 25 marks. You spend an equal amount of time on each task, read through each task carefully, and so on and so forth. It also says you can use a calculator and you can use a dictionary. So if you did want those things, you can ask for them. You can also ask for pen and paper during the test. It actually says that you should make use of a pen and pencil and paper to make notes while you're going. So you are expected to use pen and paper while you're doing this. So make sure if you need them, you ask for them during the test. At the start of the test, if you want to run through the preferences of the tutorial, the preferences just changes the screen colour like I did a minute ago, and the tutorial just takes you through how to navigate the test. The exam timer doesn't actually start until you click the Start Exam button. Once you click the Start Exam button, the exam will actually begin. So make sure you're prepared, ready, settled, okay, good to go before you actually click Start Exam. Once you click the Start Exam button, the timer will start counting down. Just take it steady through the test. There is plenty of time to complete it. You don't need to rush. So it says this task is about organising team building day for your employees at a local company. Yeah, and there are a series of outdoor activities. You have to organise your employees into teams. So there are 10 employees altogether. It says each team must have a similar combined fitness level score and include at least 1 manager. So all I'm going to do to start off with is I'm going to take a manager just randomly for each team. I've got to pick managers that have the same fitness score. That should make it easier later on. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to work out the average fitness score. So if we were to split the fitness score in half of the entire team, what would it be? So if we add up all the numbers, we're going to end up getting 33. And then 33 divided by 2, because we've got 2 teams, is going to give me 16.5. Now because no one's got a 0.5 score, I obviously can't have 2 teams with a fitness score of 16.5. I'm going to have to have one that's slightly more and one that's slightly less. So if I aim to have one team with a fitness score of 16 and one team with a fitness score of 17, then that will give me the 2 closest scores I can get. So like I say, if I pick the managers, and then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to just randomly assign a load of other people to each of the teams. So I did try to be a little bit clever here, but then I decided what I'll do is I'll just make the first 5 team A and the last 5 team B. It's just easier. And then what I can do is I can check what the scores are of those 2 teams and then adjust them as I need to be. So if I check my team B and I add those together, it turns out the score's a little bit too high. I end up with 19. So I want to lose at least 2 from that score and add that onto team A. So if I swap my 5 for a 3, that will reduce my score to 17, which means that team A must now be 16. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to add up the 2 teams just to check in the working out, to see what I've got. What I would say, if you make all your working out nice and clear, it's going to make it easier for the examiner to mark, and the easier they find it to mark, the more likely you are to get the marks. If they can't follow what you've done, they obviously can't give you the marks. If you get your answers right, you will get most of your marks anyway, but in some questions it is absolutely necessary to include working, just because even if you give an answer, you won't get marks unless there's some evidence to back it up. And other questions, it's quite complicated or quite long-winded to get the answer, so it's easy to make a mistake. So rather than make a mistake by putting way working out, you will still pick up most of the marks. Although you would still make a mistake, but hey. Okay, so nice clear working out and 2 answers. It's asked me to give 2 reasons that I've picked the team members that I have. To be honest, those 2 reasons are the reasons that you're given at the top of the screen. The first reason is that you had to have a manager in each team. So I'm just going to say that I put 1 manager in one team and 1 manager in the other team, so that I had a manager in each team. And the second part said the 2 teams should have similar combined fitness levels. So if they should have similar combined fitness levels, that's why I've put each person to each team to split the fitness scores evenly. So we've got the next section, and it's asking us to pick the activities to fill the day up and make a timetable. You'll receive an email from your manager which tells you that you have to make sure you start at 9, you finish at 5, you have a 30-minute introduction to the day, an hour for lunch from 1 PM, and a half-hour prize giving session before we finish. Both teams will do the same activities. Everyone must do archery straight after lunch. So basically we need to make sure that we put this in table format. On one side we're going to have the times, and on the other side we're going to have the activities. What I would say with the times is make sure it's nice and clear to whether it's AM or PM. So for example, either write it in 24-hour clock or write AM and PM after your times. For the activity, again, make sure you've picked the correct length of activity. There are lots of options here as to where you can do it. I've tried to keep it simple. I've picked long activities that are either an hour or an hour and a half. Again, there's no reason to make it complicated on yourself. Just remember, there's no point picking archery until after lunch, because you have to have it after lunch anyway. So pick things other than archery to start off with. You've got your 30-minute introduction to the session, and then you've got to get till 1 PM. So you're going from 9:30 till 1 PM, which means you've got 10 to 11 to 12 to 1. Okay, so that's 3.5 hours that you've got to fill. So what I've done is I've done a 1.5 hour activity to start off with, which will take me till 11, and that was the go-karting, because why not? Sounds cool. And then I've picked 2 1-hour activities. Okay, so that would be the mountain biking and the paintball. Okay, so you can see where I've inserted that extra line. It's moved the line above the one that I've inserted it into. We can just use the Control-C, Control-V commands, or in this case Control-X, Control-V commands to cut and paste it out. You can also right-click and copy and paste as well. If you do add too many rows or columns onto the table, don't worry too much. Just make it clear which area of the table you're using. So you could put borders around it and things like that, or you could just highlight the cells you're actually using. If you add an extra column or you add an extra row that you end up not using, it Doesn't matter, just make sure the cells that you are using are nice and clear and that the table is easy to read. Okay, so we've got our introduction, we've got our lunch at the time that we have to have lunch, so now we have to put in the archery. We were told archery must be done after lunch, so archery will be from 2 while 3. So once we put that in, what that does mean is that we then have to fill up the time from 3 till 4:30. And the reason it's only till 4:30 is that we have to have the prize giving session at the end of the day, which is also half an hour. So I need an hour and a half's worth of activities. Now there are ways of doing this, but the easiest way is just to add the only hour and a half, I think, activity that's left, which is the assault course. Oh, I could have had canoeing as well there. I could have also put in a couple of 45-minute activities too. Like I said, there's more than one way of doing this. So you can see me just fiddling with the cell heights there to try and get it to the right size, or in a size that I can see it all on one screen. It's not strictly necessary for what you're doing, but if the table does look neat and it is easy to read, again, it's going to be much less likely the examiner makes any mistakes, and you are much more likely therefore to pick up the marks. That said, as long as you've got all the information and it is relatively clear what you've done, you should get all the marks. But if you make it easy for the examiner, then there's no reason to lose out those marks, there's no reason to have to get it remarked or anything. So make it easy, make it clear as best you can. So all I'm doing here is largely for your benefit, so you can see the 3 parts that we had to include: the introduction, the lunch and the prizes, and then the activity that we told that we had to have, so that's the archery after lunch. So they're the 3 things we had to have, and then the other parts are the parts where you could put in whatever you wanted as long as it filled in the time. So on the next part of the question now, and it says for your team building day, the company is obviously charged, and as well as being charged, we have to work out which is the best option. So you've got 10 employees, you've got 2 different costs here. All we need to do is just do the maths to work out the cost for each employee. So if we do option 1 first, it's £38.70 for each employee, times that by 10, it's going to give you £387. Relatively straightforward. The part that we now need to work out is, it says for more than 8 employees you get a 15% discount. So we do need to work out what that 15% discount is. So that's 15% off of 387. So one way of working it out is to work out 15% of 387. Now the normal way to do that is to do 387 times 15 divided by 100, and that's what I teach most of my students. Okay, but there is actually a way on the calculator to do it that's a little bit easier. This is on all the City and Guilds tests, and all you would do is when you bring up the inline calculator, if you do 387 times 15 and then just press the percent button instead of the equals button. Notice that that is pressing the percent button instead of the equals button, you don't press both. Then that gives you 15%. So all I've done is 387 times 15%, I haven't pressed the equals button and it has given me the percentage. So it's £58.05. The other way around doing that is, because I'm then going to have to take that off of the 387 because that's the discount amount, is if you take 15% off of something, what's left is 85%. So I could have just worked out 85% of 387, and that would have also given me the final amount that I would have to pay. So we've got 328.95 there. That's 387 minus 58.05. If we do 387 times 85%, we're going to get exactly the same answer. So the next one is option 2. So I'm just going to count up how many activities I've actually taken part in. So there are 5 activities there. There's the 4 that I picked and the one that we were told we had to pick. So 5 activities altogether. There are 10 employees and it's £9.85 for each employee for each activity. So basically we've got 50 different charges. 10 employees, each doing 5 activities. That's a total of 50 activities. So if I do 10 times 5 times by the £9.85, that will give me the answer. Now, I'll be honest here, I did mess up. For some reason, I did 15 times £9.65 instead of 50 times £9.65. Fortunately, I did spot it and I did correct myself a little later, but this answer is incorrect at the moment. It's not 144, which is obvious because, well, 10 times 5 is 50, and then basically it's 50 times 10, so it should be around 500 marks, shouldn't it? What I'm doing next is I'm working out the lunch, because you have to pay for lunch on this one as well. So lunch for the employees is around £70, £69.50, and then I'm adding them together. Again, remember this cost is wrong at the moment because I still haven't corrected that 144.75. I think it's perhaps important to note here that anybody can make a mistake, particularly when you're doing your arithmetic, particularly when you're just entering numbers into a calculator. It is important to have a rough idea of what you're doing. If you make a mistake in the exam, it's not the end of the world. There is a certain margin for error. You don't have to get every question right. Just bear in mind, if your mental arithmetic is quite good, you will spot things like this, and you will realise, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. And that's why we do try and encourage you to use more mental arithmetic. But at the end of the day, we all make mistakes. Errors do happen. You obviously need to get as many questions right as possible in the exam. You don't have to get them all right. If you make one error, it's not the end of the world. And this is the other reason for showing or working out. Because an examiner could see there that I've written down 10 times 5 times 965. It's just my answer to that question is not the answer to the sum. That's what it should have been, £482.50. So I've realised I've done it. I've corrected it, but even if I hadn't, I'd probably only have lost 1 mark because the examiner can see I've actually got the correct work in there. Every other part of the question is very clearly, it's easy to follow what I've done. So it's just the calculation itself that I've done wrong. So I would still pick up most of the marks. And those sorts of errors are easy to make, which is why I've been writing my working down as going, also so that you can see it too. But fortunately I did pick it up and I have changed it. On the other side of that, it's not an actual test for me, is it? So it's not in the world either way, but do be careful. You will get a lot of these sorts of questions in functional skills where it's asking you to explain yourself. They just want to see that you understand what it is that you've done. So we can see here that option 1 is much cheaper than option 2. You're going to save yourself over £200. So I think it's quite clear that anybody would pick option 1. That's all you have to say. Pick option 1, and the reason you picked it is because it's a lot cheaper. Sometimes you can pick either option. In this case, I don't think there's any reason to pick option 2. They're both for the same activities, both for the same thing. Obviously, if you had worked out that option 2 was cheaper, if you'd done the maths incorrectly, like I did earlier for example, and then you said that you would pick option 2 because it was cheaper, although you would lose the marks for getting the option 2 answer wrong, you are awarded follow-through marks, and you would be awarded the mark for explaining that you'd picked option 2 because it was cheaper if you had said it was cheaper. Okay, so don't worry if you do make any mistake in your calculation. You can only actually be marked down once for a mistake. If you make a mistake early on and then you base all your answers on that, you only get marked down for the original mistake. You don't get them marked down for all the other options. If all the other things you've said based on that one wrong mistake are accurate, then you still get the marks. Yeah? Even though on the mark scheme and things it doesn't look right, you only get marked down for an incorrect answer once. Reverse check's dead easy. Just copy in a calculation from one of your things. It only has to be one calculation, and just do the opposite. So I've done 10 times 695 here, which equals 6950. So then I've done 6950 divided by 695 equals 10, and that's a reverse calculation. Probably come up twice during the test. You can see the 2 marks each, so that's 4 marks. 4 marks out of 75, not a huge amount, but 4 easy marks. Okay, I'll be honest, this is the bit that annoys me a little bit. It's the bit where you have to essentially explain what you've done. So you're asked to make some comments about what you did and how well you think you did. Think about any other information that you'd have liked, how sensible your answers were, how well your methods work, anything you found difficult, and things you might do differently if you had to tackle a similar problem. I would take one of each of those 5 things. There are 5 things there, you've got 3 comments to make, so pick 3 of the 5 and just say something about those 3 that you've picked. Okay, if you can't think of anything, try one of the other ones. I would try and pick something difficult first. You can be relative with these comments, so as long as you can find some modicum of difficulty in it, it didn't have to be particularly demanding or particularly taxing. You just had to explain why it could have possibly been easier. So in this case, I'm going to take out the team picking. Because with the team picking, we had to sort the teams into 2 equal teams with levels of fitness. There were 10 people, and the total levels of fitness came up to an odd number. So if I try and divide that odd number into 2, I end up with a fraction, or a decimal. Obviously, I can't split the 2 teams into 2 exactly equal teams then. So that was the difficulty. Had the ratings ended up as an even number, it would have been easier to sort out the teams. And therefore, that was the difficulty. Okay, it also asks how sensible your answers were. Presumably, up to this stage, you think all your answers are sensible, otherwise you wouldn't have used them. So there's not really any reason you should be saying that you thought your answers were not sensible. I'm going to say that I thought the answer to my 3A question was very sensible, as there was a dramatic difference in the prices. So therefore, the option I picked was considerably cheaper and saved a considerable amount of money, which meant it was the most sensible option. And there were no real downsides to that choice. So, yeah. Finally, I'm going to pick any other information I would have liked. There are loads of bits of information you can have for any task. In this case, I'm going to say that I'd have liked more information about the teams. If I'd known who got on, who didn't get on, or any other details about the people in the teams, it would have been easier to pick the teams. So that's the only other information I would have liked. probably would try and avoid the last one, things you might do differently if you had to tackle a similar problem. Bear in mind this is a test, you should be making your best effort and trying to get the best options that you can. If you haven't done it in the best way that you can think of, then you should probably go back and do it in the best way that you can think of. So things you had to do differently if you had to tackle a similar problem is probably a bit of an unfair question. If it does make you think of a better way of doing it, depending on how much time it's taken you so far, it might be better to go back and do it that way. But chances are you've already done it the best you can, otherwise you wouldn't have done it that way. Okay, so we're a fair way into the exam now, about 25 minutes I reckon, and we're on task 2. So task 2, we've got a food zone, there's a food zone at this event, and we're working out the seating section dimensions. We can see we've got a scale on the plan, and we've also got 2 of the measurements already in. So I've got the measurement for the length of B. Now that's useful because you can see that B isn't exactly so many squares. It doesn't fit the 5 meter scale very well. So we've got 5, then 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 and a bit. Okay. And if you work out how much that bit is, it's actually another 1 meter. And if you're not sure of that, you can see because B is 31 meters, it must be another 1 meter. Okay. Also F is done for us as well, so all we're filling in is the remaining ones. So A was very easy to see. You can see that A goes down 2 sets of 5, yeah. So the next one we need to work out is C. And I can see that C is basically 11 meters, because how it works out is 5 meters is 10 small squares, therefore each small square is 50 centimeters. If each small square is 50 centimeters, and if we've got 2 extra like we have on C, that would be an extra meter. So I've got 2 sets of 5 and 2 small squares, which is 1 extra meter. I will say that when you're doing this on a computer screen, it is very tedious. It's not the most enjoyable task in the world, but we do need to try and be as accurate as possible. We do need to try and get it right. It is easy to miscount the squares, so do not feel ashamed of counting them over again. Do not feel ashamed of putting your finger next to the screen to try and count them. If you want to use a ruler or a piece of paper over the screen just to make sure you're counting them right, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so when it comes to showing a check of the scale, we just need to describe the length of the scale and describe the length of the line that we're actually going to use. I would always pick a line that's relatively easy to describe the length of. You can see that because the lines are all marked with letters here, that it's easy to describe which line you're going to check because it says my check is for length and then you're picking that line. When you pick that line, you need to describe why you said it was that length. So in this case I'm going to pick A because A is 10. 10 is twice of 5. It's a nice round number. It's easy to describe the length of. The length of the scale is 5 meters. There are 10 small squares in that 5 meters, so I'd say the scale is going to show me that 10 small squares is 5 meters. Therefore, A, which is 20 small squares, must be 10 meters. It's as simple as that. You just need to make sure that you are referencing the scale that's given and that you are referencing the line that you've chosen. I know in the previous online tests you actually had to nominate the line yourself, so in your answer you would describe the line, but I think they're trying to just make sure that's a little bit easier so that picking the line is obvious. However, you do still need to describe the length of the line both in terms of squares, the squares on the paper, and in terms of the length it would be in real life. So if 10 small squares is 5 meters, then 20 small squares must be 10 meters. Okay, so now we're working out the area of the section. Working out the area of the section should be relatively straightforward. It's a compound shape, so in other words it's two right-angled shapes put together. The first one is a large rectangle across the top, so I'm going to take the numbers that are easy to work with. A and F will give me the sides of that large rectangle. So that's 10 times 40. 10 times 40 is 400. Nice easy numbers to work with. When you do get options like that, try and make it easy on yourself, don't make life difficult, doesn't have to be. F goes all the way across, which means the remaining section is the little square coming off the bottom, or the little rectangle coming off the bottom, which is C and D. C and D is 9 and 11 meters, so 9 times 11 is 99. So the large rectangle block at the top is 400, the little rectangle coming off the bottom is another 99, so 400 plus 99 gives me 499 meters squared. That's that done. So this question is just making sure we can use percentages. It's saying that the seating section is 50% larger than last year. Last year it was 320 meters squared. You need to demonstrate that it is indeed more than 50% larger. So all we're going to do is I've written down the 499 from the previous question. You might have jotted this down on a piece of paper. Don't know how you remembered it. It did say that you would need to remember it though. And then I'm going to work out 50% of 320, which is 160. Again, remember when you're using that percentage sign on the built-in calculator, as soon as you press percent, it'll give you your answer. If I then add the 50% onto the 320, it gives me 480, and that is 50% more than 320. Another way of doing that is to basically times 320 by 150%, and that would give you 150%, which is 50% more. We can see that 499 is bigger than 480. Yeah, it's 19 bigger to be exact. So therefore, the space this year is more than 50% more, because if it was only 50% more, it would be 480. If it was less than 50% more, it would be less than 480. As it's more than 480, we can say it's definitively larger. I was looking for a way to put meters squared into the explanation box. I cannot see a way to do it. I tried the keyboard shortcuts as well. It doesn't look like it's possible. It's not actually asking you for the measurements themselves, so if I just compare the numbers directly and just say that 499 is bigger than 480 without actually mentioning meters squared. I could have written the words meters squared, I guess, but I don't think it's strictly speaking necessary. Obviously, one of the reasons I try to make my working out boxes nice and clear is so that you can follow it as I'm doing it. If you can see what I've done, it's going to be much easier for you to understand what I've done. But I would say that when you're doing your working out as well, because I think it's a common error that people make, try and make it clear. If the working out is clear, it's easier for the examiner to follow. The easier they find it to follow, one, the more likely they are to see any marks that you've picked up where you have made mistakes. If you've got the answer wrong and they see you working out, and you've picked up a mark in that working out, they're much more likely to see it. they're much more likely to understand what you're doing, and if they understand what you're doing, they're much more likely to be sympathetic to your working out and such like. And thirdly, if you've got nice clear working out, they're going to think you know what you're doing, so even when you do make mistakes, they may accidentally give you marks. I'm not saying that will happen, I'm sure they're professionals, but if you seem like you know what you're doing, people generally give you the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so for this question we're working out the formula on the side. What we are expected to know is that 1 foot is 12 inches, or there are 12 inches in a foot. Much like any other maths test, I would strongly encourage you to have a 30 centimetre 1 foot ruler, or rule, depending on how you want to argue about the English. But if you get a 30 centimetre rule with inches on the other side, it's useful for GCSE, because in GCSE you may be expected to convert from centimetres to inches, and it's useful for functional skills for this example, so that you know that it's a 1 foot rule and there are 12 inches on it. Although that said, I'm not sure if you're allowed a ruler for this test, so that may be beside the point. But anyway, the 12 inches in a foot, so I'm going to take the 23 feet, times it by 12, which gives me 276, and then I'm going to add the additional 9 inches, so that gives me 285 inches in total. I'm then going to put that 285 into the formula that it gave me at the side. So the formula was F, which is the number of inches, divided by 39.37, and then add on another 1.5. Okay, so I am going to round my answer here. I'm going to round it to 2 decimal places or 3 significant figures. I'm just rounding the 7.23 up to 7.24. There are 2 reasons that I'm going to round it up. One is that 7.239 is closer to 7.24 than 7.23 anyway. And secondly, we're working out the minimum size. Because it's the minimum size, I couldn't possibly round it down even if I wanted to. Therefore, even if it was 7.232, I would still have to round it up to 7.24, because I can't possibly get any smaller when you're working out the minimum. After that, we're going to round it up anyway, because it says round it to up to the next metre. So if I round it up, 8.74 after I've added the 1.5 becomes 9. Just remember, if you're working at a minimum, you can't go smaller, so you would always have to round up. If you're working at a maximum, you can't go larger, so you would always have to round down. So for the minimum length of the pitch, I'm going to put in my 8.74 answer before I round it to the nearest metre, round it up to the nearest metre, and then my 9 metres for the next part. We're then asked how many vans, based on the length of the pitch that we've worked out, can we fit on. So one space for food vans is 40 metres in length, the other space for the food vans is 28 metres in length. They're not next to each other, so we have to treat them separately. I'm going to take the 40 metres, I'm going to divide that by 9, which is going to give me 4 and 4 ninths, so 4.4 recurring. And then I'm going to do 28 divided by 9, so 27 divided by 9 is 3, so 28 divided by 9 is 3 and 1 ninth, so 3 and 1 ninth is 3.1 recurring. Remember, this isn't an arithmetic test. You have every right to use the inbuilt calculator. You are also allowed to take your own calculator in with you, as long as it is not a programmable calculator and it is obviously not a phone. Sorry about that. So that completes section 2, and that's 40 minutes. So we have been doing this for quite some time. I would say 2 things. 1, bear in mind I obviously do maths day in, day out, so I'm probably doing this slightly quicker than you would expect. And B, I'm trying to explain it as I'm going along, so it's probably taking me slightly longer than you might expect. So in one respect I'm probably going a little bit quicker, in one respect I'm probably going a little bit slower. What I would say is if you were doing it, I would say based on those 2 things, you should probably be doing it at about the same sort of speed, okay? Maybe a little bit slower, to be honest. Okay, so for this question we've been asked to pick an average, and once we've picked that average we have to obviously work them out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the mean, and the reason I'm picking the mean is probably the most complex to work out, but I'm going to work out all 3 answers for all 3 sections, so you can see what I've done to work out the mean, to work out the median, and to work out the mode for all 3 sections. It actually, in this example, does not matter which one you pick. You can pick any of them. There are advantages and disadvantages to each. You will be asked to justify which you picked. Probably the contradictory thing there is that the mean is obviously the one that includes all the values, and therefore everything is taken into account, and the median is the one that excludes the extreme values, and therefore extreme views aren't taken into account, just mainstream, sort of. So they almost do the opposite of each other, but you can use both those opposite arguments to justify the use of the each. So for anyone that doesn't remember, the mean is where we add them all up and divide them by how many there is. The median is the number that appears in the middle. Now because in this we've got 12 values, the middle is going to be the 6th and 7th value. So it's the number that appears between the 6th and 7th value. In the case where those values are the same, it's just going to be the same number. So in the case of this one it was 4. And I believe in the next one it's 6.5, it's between 6 and 7. The mode is just the one that appears most often, regardless of whether it's the highest or the smallest or whatever. So in this case it is the highest, it's 6. And that is also the justification for the mode as well. It's the one that there's the most of. I will be honest, I've probably put a little bit more effort into the layout of my working out than is strictly necessary on this question. I would still encourage you to keep it neat, but this is as much for your benefit so you can see what I'm doing as it is for the examiners. Remember, when you do work out the median, you do have to put the values in order. So what I would do is I would go through them all, try and put them in order as best you can, and after you've put them all in order, just count to make sure that you do have the same number of values as there are on the actual list. I do apologise for being a little slow. It's about midnight now, so I have been meaning to do a level 2 video on this for a while. I haven't really had the time. I would like to do many more videos on the other level 1 samples, on some of the other level 2 samples, although they're a little out of date now, and also on the IT, but again, it's finding the time to do these things. They are very time consuming. And when you're tired, maths can be a bit slow sometimes. So again, just to reiterate, the only reason I've worked out all 3 options for each of the categories is so that you can see what the answers were. You only need to work one of them out. So you can either do the mean, or you can do the median, or you can do the mode. You do not have to do all three for each of the categories, just whichever you've picked in that drop down box. So you can see I've put my answers in. It says to make your note of your answers because you will need them for question 3 and 4, which aren't till later on. Explain why the average you used is the most suitable. We already briefly went over that, but the mean incorporates all the values. To work out the mean, you have to set up everything and divide it by how many there is. The median excludes the extreme values, so it only takes into account the central values, which means if there's someone who's given a score that's particularly mean or particularly out of line for some reason, or seems out of the ordinary, it won't be included. So it excludes extreme values, it only includes the core values. And the mode includes the value that came up the most often. They're essentially the reasons for picking them, the reasons that they are what they are. And there's no correct or incorrect answer. It's just largely to make sure you understand the advantages of the concept that you're using, because they all have their advantages and they all have their disadvantages. So the mean does incorporate the outside chances. That's why the government only uses the median when it works out the average wage. It doesn't want to include people who earn huge amounts of money to distort the figures. They want you to be able to compare yourself to roughly where everybody else is, so they use the median instead. That said, it does mean that things aren't divided equally. I say pros and cons. Okay, so almost always when we do get a mean question or an average question, we get a range question. The two tend to go hand in hand, and they do tend to show up on task 3. So with this it's much easier. Obviously we just need the highest and the lowest value of each one. We're going to take the highest and we're going to subtract the lowest, and that will give us the range for each section. Remember, range is not a type of average, but it is often used with averages to interpret results. You can also pretty much guarantee if you've been asked to work out the range, you will be asked to explain the range as well. It doesn't actually come up till a little later in the test, but the words they tend to look for are things like variance, variation, or what's the opposite of variation? Brain's died. I'm thinking continuity, but that's not the word they look for. Variation or consistency. That's it. So they're the two words they'd like to see. Either the range means if it's low, it's consistent. You're getting reliable, consistent results. Or there's a large variation, a large variety of opinions, or variety of data. Okay, so before we get to there, we've got the chart question. Again, there will always be one of these on the test. It could be one of a number of charts. More typically it will be a bar chart or a line graph. Remember, line graphs are typically used when you're measuring data over time. Bar charts are when you're measuring quantities. If you do get a pie chart, I don't remember seeing a question with one, but presumably you must, otherwise they wouldn't have the tool on there. If you do get a pie charts are used for ratio or proportion. So, bar chart for quantities of categories, line graph for trends over time, data over time, so it could be quantities as well, but the point is it's over a period of time. Pie charts for ratios and proportions, and a scatter graph is you've got two sets of changing variables, essentially. So we can see I went into the edit axis button to change the values on the side. I ticked the show numbers box. They have changed that slightly since I last saw it, but I've clicked the show numbers box for the vertical axis, because the vertical axis is the one that I'm putting the values on. I've then increased the number of numbered divisions, which has showed the numbers appear up the side because I'd already ticked the show numbers box, and then I added one extra division between the number divisions. So essentially each marker on my chart at the side represents 1, and you can see the number divisions go up in 2s. I'm now going to add a key. The key is going to add colours for each of the different categories. There are obviously 3 categories. I've already increased the number of bars to 3. When I put these keys in, I'm going to change a colour, so there's a different colour for each bar, and then once I've put the bars up to the right level, I will colour in the bars to match the colours of the key. Make sure your key has some sort of title, and make sure that each of the key items is clearly labelled and has a different colour associated with it. I am also going to put titles across the horizontal axis as well. This isn't necessarily necessary, but I've put it across the bottom in case for some reason the key blocks the view of the chart. In this case it does actually partially block it, because when I draw up that third line you can just see it sticking out from underneath the key, but the key does cover part of the bar. Therefore it might be better if I'd used the horizontal labels, which I'm going to put on in a minute, and got rid of the key altogether. But you need either a key or category labels on the horizontal axis. The point is, any chart, regardless of what type it is, somebody should be able to look at it and tell them what the data is saying. They should be able to read the chart without having any other information. There should be enough on the chart that people know what it's about and they know what the values actually are. Okay, so to move the boxes for the text boxes, you have to select the little square in the middle of the text box, and that allows you to drag it instead of moving it. If you need to get up the box with all the font options and things, just click off the box and click on it again, and the box will reappear. Okay, so I'm putting my axis title on now. What we can do with the axis titles is if you hover the mouse over one of the corners of the box, you'll get that little rotating sign, and then you can just pull the box round, rotate it round. So I've got it going up the side of the axis, so it's nice and clear. So what I'm looking for here is just what title I should be using. Remember, every bar chart should have a title. Mine is actually currently titled incorrectly. I've put that it showed the design, but the design is just one of the features of the new product. Okay, and I am actually missing a title for the axis at the bottom there. If you are going to put the categories across the bottom, we need to make sure that we've got an axis title to go with them to describe what they are there for. So it could be months, well, that might be more for a line chart, but it could be months, it could be shoe sizes, whatever it happens to be. Okay, and this is the one where we're asked to describe the average and the range, what they kind of mean. So the average for the fragrance, if we look at it, was relatively high. So that means that it was generally well liked. Regardless of which average you picked, that is largely what you're going to say. If obviously the average is low, you would say it wasn't particularly well received. If the average is high, you can say it was particularly well received. Bear in mind though, because it is an average, you can't say that everybody liked it. Not unless it was 10 out of 10, in which case all the results must have been 10 if you'd used the mean. But yeah, it's starting to get a bit technical there. If it was the median, that still wouldn't necessarily hold true, and if it was the mode, it wouldn't necessarily hold true. So essentially, if the value's high, fragrance was liked generally. If the mean or average is low, then it was generally not liked. For the range, again, we're looking at that important word, variation, consistent. Was there a high variety or was there a high consistency? It's one or the other, it's not both. You don't need to use both those words, but they are the kind of key words that sitting guilds seem to look for. So you either want to say if the range was low, the data was very inconsistent, or there was a low variety. If the range was large, then there was a high variation, or the data was very inconsistent. They're the sort of words they're looking for. I would say again, because this is a functional skills exam, they are looking for your opinion to see if you're applying this to real life situations. If you've got a genuine explanation for something which doesn't necessarily fit in with the maths, as long as you explain it thoroughly, don't be too scared about putting it in there. I would try and focus on the maths. This is a maths test at the end of the day, but if you know for some reason something is the way it is or isn't the way it isn't, add that into your descriptions, add it into your explanations, or write it down in your working box. There's nothing wrong with applying real life to these questions, because that is the whole point of them. Although it is worth pointing out, just for some of my students out there, if your employer is asking you to do something, you do it because you're told to. Okay, so when I say apply real life, don't turn around and say, well, why am I doing this at all? Yeah, I'm sure if you're watching this video you're not thinking that, but just for the couple of you that might be thinking that, yeah, you're doing it because you've been asked to. Yeah. And for the rest of you, if you've lasted this long, then I appreciate you're probably going to do very well on the test. I know it is a very long video, apologies for that. So all I've done here is I've extended the lines using the line drawing tool to the end. I can see that it's just over 1,000 for one of the lines for the paper vouchers. So for the paper vouchers, I'm going to say 1,050. There is a certain margin for error for this. I'll be honest, I did look it up on the mark scheme just to be sure, and there is a certain margin for error, and if I'd picked 1,000 it would have made my life easier. However, I'm fairly confident that line's above 1,000, so I'm going to stick with 1,050, and for the online vouchers it does pretty much end up on the line, so it's 4,000. They do actually give you more margin for error on the paper vouchers than they do for online vouchers, presumably because the paper vouchers isn't quite as nice a line, it doesn't end quite as nicely. The online vouchers, they give you a plus or minus 100, so that gives you a rough idea of where the leeway variance is. Paper vouchers, like I say, they give you a little bit more. It then asks you to work out the probability, given that they hand out 100,000 paper vouchers, that one of those vouchers would actually be used. Now for probability, all you have to do is take the number that are actually applied and divide it by the total number. So in this case 1,050, because that was the answer that I picked, divided by 100,000. What I'm looking for here, as I keep scrolling up and down, is the calculator tool. There isn't a calculator tool on that page, so I'm going back to a previous page with it on. To be fair, I should have been able to do this in my head. Again, I blame the time of night. But you're under no obligation to do any maths in your head for the test. Okay? Don't try and be clever. Just, if you're not sure, use a calculator. If you are sure, great, go for it. You don't have to use the built-in test. You can take your own calculator, but again, make sure that if you do take your own calculator, firstly you actually know how to use it. Yeah, simple calculators sometimes apply BIDMAS, BODMAS rules, sometimes they don't, or PEDMAS rules, depending where you're from. Sometimes they apply those rules, sometimes they don't if they're a simple calculator. Scientific calculators almost always do apply those rules. So if you are using a calculator, make sure you actually know how to use it, particularly when you're dealing with things like mean. Yeah, if you add everything up and then you divide it, and it does apply BIDMAS and you haven't used brackets at all, it will do the division first, then add everything up. So one way possibly around that is to press equals after you've added everything up and then do the division with the answer. But anyway, yeah, back onto this question. 1050 divided by 100,000 gives me 0.0105, okay, or 1.05%. Either of those answers is correct. You can express your probability as a percentage or as a decimal. Nothing wrong with either of those. I'm then going to put it onto the probability line. Because I've chosen to use decimal, I'm going to use decimal for the probability line as well. All probability lines are the same. They go from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%. Okay, same thing. And in this case you can see that the cross is practically on 0. It's not quite on 0, but it should be just over 1/100th of the way across. Okay, so maybe it's a little bit too far to the left, just a tad, but again, there'll be a certain margin for error on that. So the final question is, as the company spends the same amount of money to pay for vouchers for each promotion, half the money is spent on paper vouchers and the other half on online vouchers. Use the results from your graph to decide whether the company should continue to spend money on paper vouchers for promotion 9. I'm going to choose no, because paper vouchers are clearly declining in use. However, and again I double check the mark scheme for this bit, you could also argue yes. So yes and no, there is no correct answer. So your 1 mark isn't for the answer that you pick, your 1 mark is for the explanation of the answer that you pick. So if you pick no, like I chose to, it's because the use of paper vouchers is on decline and it could be better to invest the money elsewhere. On the other hand, you don't know how much they're actually spending on paper vouchers. It doesn't say that anywhere. So although it says they spend money on it, it could be a very small amount of money. In which case, if a few people are using them, because bear in mind 1,000 of them are still going to likely to be used, it might actually still be worth buying them. So that's the argument for yes. So there is an argument for no, and there is an argument for yes. And it doesn't matter whether you pick yes or no. What matters is that you understand the argument that you're making. Again, this is a functional skills exam. The important part of it, although it's meant to be about applying real life situations and understanding them. So thank you very much for bearing with me for the video. It is about to end. There's only about a minute left. If you want to you can see the answers that I've put up there. I'm just filling in the last bit. And I will post this for you all. In fact, if you've listened to this, I've already done it. Proves how late it's getting. So I hope you sleep well, and for those of you taking the test, good luck. I hope it goes well. I'm sure it will. And thank you for your time.